My sister is moving in with us starting today. It's all good stuff for both of us, and there's really no reason to object, right? As soon as the moving is done, my husband walks in proudly with his sister. Just like my husband said, my beloved grandfather passed away recently. I was physically and mentally exhausted from handling the funeral arrangements, sorting through his belongings, and most of all, the sudden farewell to someone I loved dearly. I inherited the house where my grandfather lived, and at my husband's suggestion, we decided to move in. Just when we finally finished moving everything in, my affection for him quickly dwindled due to his out-of-line action of bringing his sister without any prior consultation. My name is Emily. I graduated from the pharmacy department at a local university, and this is my 5th year working as a pharmacist. I met my husband, a classmate, 2 years ago through an introduction by a colleague at the hospital where I work. My husband, a full-time employee at a supermarket, has a generous nature and had just broken up with his girlfriend from his college days, leaving him heartbroken. I had a boyfriend once in high school, but it didn't last long. Both my husband and I didn't have much experience in love, but somehow, that felt reassuring. Even though our days off didn't match up due to our different professions, we dated smoothly, and we got married when my husband was promoted to chief at his workplace. After getting married, we started living together in a rented apartment in a convenient part of the city. My parents had passed away in an accident, and since high school, I had been living with my grandfather in his house. The house was very old, and it creaked everywhere you walked. However, he had been in and out of the hospital due to a chronic illness for the past 6 months, and the house was mostly empty. For me, it was a precious home filled with memories of my grandfather, so I kept going back to clean it from time to time even after we moved. My grandfather, though worn out from his battle with his illness, was overjoyed that I got married. "I can fight through the tough treatment with this," he said, and I made a promise to myself to be happy for him. Fortunately, I was able to get along well with my in-laws. They live quite far away, so we might only be able to see them a few times a year, but they said, "You're always welcome to visit." Everything seemed to be off to a good start in our happy married life, but there was one thing that made me uneasy. And that was my sister-in-law. She is a lively 19-year-old, currently in her first year of college. She lives in a dorm near our apartment while attending a college in the city. My husband was the one who decided on our living arrangement, and one of the reasons seemed to be because his sister was going to college in the city. They have always been close as siblings, and she had told him, "I wish you lived closer." Of course, it's great if the family gets along. But I regretted not speaking up more when my husband practically decided on our living arrangement on a whim just because his sister asked him to. About 3 days after we finished moving, the weekend finally arrived, and I was planning to finish unpacking the remaining boxes. That's when my husband brought his sister over without telling me. I was caught off guard, wearing loungewear and no makeup, and I panicked. I couldn't just ask them to leave, so I hurriedly cleared some space and had them sit in the living room. I had met her a few times while we were dating, but we had always made plans in advance, and I had only met her outside, so I was dressed properly. "I would have prepared if I knew you were coming," I thought irritably to myself, but I decided to calm down in front of my sister-in-law. "Congratulations on your marriage. Please take good care of my brother forever," she said, handing me a paper bag. Inside was a selection of baked goods from a famous bakery. "You didn't have to go out of your way. If you do this, it's going to cost me a fortune to return the favor," my husband said, peeking inside and laughing carelessly, but I was feeling nervous inside. Just like my husband said, my sister-in-law is a big spender. She dresses in luxury brands that you wouldn't expect from a student, and it honestly looks mismatched on her youthful face. I once asked my husband if she was involved in anything suspicious because of her lavish lifestyle. But when it comes to his sister, he suddenly changes his tone and says, she would never do such a thing. But I'll talk to her about it if she's really struggling with money, and I'll help her out. I'm pretty sure my sister-in-law is receiving a monthly allowance from my in-laws as well. I heard it straight from my mother-in-law, and she even told me how much it was, so I don't think it's a lie. On top of her tuition fees, she receives enough money to live comfortably without indulging in luxuries, yet she is currently also accepting financial support from my husband. When I pointed out that this was spoiling her too much, my husband argued back, leading to a heated argument. I can understand his concern for his sister, but there have been instances where he has bought her expensive bags and jewelry every month, or gone to her apartment to cook for her, which made me upset. However, aside from that, He is a kind and helpful husband who willingly does his share of the household chores, so that was the only thing bothering me about him. The problem lies with the sister-in-law herself. She seems to not think very highly of me, making condescending remarks. Given that her parents and brother always act in ways that suit her, she probably feels like I am in the way. Emily, it was surprising to find out that someone like you became my brother's wife. He used to date pretty women who looked like models. You have a, how should I say, more down-to-earth vibe. There's a difference between a woman you date and a woman you marry, right? I hope he doesn't cheat on you. Emily, you're a pharmacist, so you must have a good salary, right? Why don't you dress more fashionably? Were you a gloomy nerd who could only study when you were a student? There are countless backhanded comments like these that she whispers to me when my husband is not around. She is essentially a 19-year-old child, and it would be exhausting to deal with her seriously. There were times when I considered telling my husband about her behavior, but he dotes on his sister so much, and I could easily imagine that bringing it up would only complicate matters further. Since her harassment was limited to making snide remarks, I decided to keep it to myself and not tell anyone. Besides, we have a long relationship ahead of us, and I thought it would be counterproductive to rush into getting along, so I decided to gradually deepen our relationship over time and not take her behavior too seriously. Just a few days ago, my sister-in-law, who was supposed to have just visited, came by unannounced again. However, at that time, my husband was not yet home, and I was preparing to go to work in the afternoon. The cafeteria was crowded, so I thought I'd come here for lunch. I brought some friends too, is that okay? While I wanted to yell at her for her audacity, there were girls around her age standing behind her, so I managed to keep my cool and asked them to leave. I don't know how she explained this situation, but I received numerous calls from my husband while I was at work in the evening. Are you out of your mind, turning away hungry young girls? If you didn't have time, you could have at least given them money. My sister called me saying she was embarrassed in front of her friends. I'm not sure if this incident was the trigger, but since then I've noticed a change in my husband's attitude. He gradually stopped doing the household chores that we had agreed to share, and as I couldn't stand seeing things left undone for days, I ended up doing everything myself, making it solely my responsibility. I thought he had a generous personality, but it turns out he is just sloppy and quick to lose interest. He would buy things for his new hobbies, only to let them gather dust soon after. This was a common occurrence. It would be one thing if it was just his own room, but when he started cluttering up the dining table and the car with his hobby stuff, I had to say something. However, he only ignored me, not taking any real action to address the issue. I'm starting to feel that he is losing interest in me, as he thinks I nag too much. Despite his sloppiness, he acts differently towards his sister. Her unannounced visits continue, during which she would eat our food and openly harass me without holding back. At first, she would only make snide remarks when my husband was not around, but recently, knowing how much her brother adores her, she has become bold enough to openly make snide remarks. My sister-in-law criticizes the food I make, saying things like, "The seasoning is too strong. Are you really a pharmacist? Are you trying to make people sick with your food so they have to buy medicine? My brother should be careful." She would make such cruel jokes, demeaning even my profession, but my husband would just laugh along with her. Moreover, she would regularly wheedle substantial amounts of money from my husband, far more than a simple allowance. I could understand if she said she was running out of money for living expenses, or if she wanted to buy textbooks for college, but wanting to buy a birthday present for a friend seems like a personal matter to me. In addition, she drags her husband around, making him accompany her on shopping trips and making him buy high-end brand items. Of course, when I point this out, she gets angry and says, "It's my own money, I can do what I want with it," making it impossible to have a rational discussion. My husband probably has no clue that his sister, who gets whatever she asks for, is mocking me behind his back, while I, who have received nothing, am left to suffer. The moment I say a word to her, she immediately puts on a crying face and dramatically seeks help from her husband. He is completely fooled by such over-the-top acting, it's just pitiful. I realized too late that my husband is an extreme sister complex. The sight of him 100% believing everything his sister says and lecturing me is so absurd, it's enough to make any feelings of love wither away. But eventually, I noticed that she's already a junior in college. I thought that she would become busier with job hunting and writing her thesis, and we would see less of each other, so I decided to endure it a little longer. I hoped that after she graduated and got married quickly, her malicious nature would calm down somewhat. However, what really brought me down wasn't my husband or his sister, but the passing of my beloved grandfather. Since I have no grandmother or parents, I was the one to inherit his estate. I was considering what to do with the remaining house, thinking about demolishing it to keep the beautiful memories. But my husband stopped me, suggesting that since it's such a magnificent house, we should live in it as a couple. My grandfather had a long hospital stay in his later years, so he hardly had any contact with my husband. The fact that my husband, who is cold to everyone but his sister, suggested keeping this house was completely unexpected, and I was overjoyed at the time. My grandfather was gone, but I could come back to this house. I hadn't felt such a thrill in my chest since getting married, but it was shattered just a few months later. When we did a house inspection before moving in, we found that the plumbing needed repairs, but that was about it. My grandfather had cherished the house he built in his youth, and even the contractor said it was in quite good shape for its age. The creaking of the floors was a concern, but I thought it would be fine to consider remodeling when a new family was born between my husband and me. I made steady progress cleaning the rooms in between work, and I also sorted through my grandfather's belongings. Once everything was packed and ready to move, I proceeded with preparations while asking for help from the moving company. In the middle of all this, my husband disappeared without saying anything, so I thought he might have gone to the nearby convenience store. But when it was time to leave, he still hadn't returned, and when I called him in a panic, all he said was, "Go ahead," in a curt tone. I didn't understand what was happening, but I couldn't keep the movers waiting any longer, so I decided to go to my grandfather's house first. It was only after all the belongings were moved in, and the paperwork with the movers was finished, that I finally saw my husband. When I saw his sister standing close beside him, I had a bad feeling. And I was right, my husband said something outrageous. "From today, the three of us are going to live together. The house is big enough, and it would be lonely for the two of us, wouldn't it? It's cruel to make my little sister live in a tiny apartment every month, and this is perfect timing. You'll support her in her job hunting, won't you?" "What? Why are you deciding this on your own? This is my grandfather's house. You have to consult with me first." "It's the same thing even if I consult with you, isn't it? The house will be lively, it'll be fun, and my sister can focus on her studies and job hunting. What's the problem?" "To be clear, it's a problem. Can you leave for today, and we'll talk about the details later?" I had been doing everything by myself for months, dealing with the funeral and moving procedures, and I was quite exhausted. Also, I didn't have the emotional capacity to talk to someone who could casually say it was good timing to start living in this house just because my grandfather had died. But my husband didn't care and yelled at me. "What right do you have to say that? If you don't like living together, then you can leave. I suggested this thinking it would be good for you, and here you are acting all high and mighty. I'd feel relieved if you were gone. I won't show any mercy to someone who treats my important family like this." I was shocked by his tone, as if he didn't even consider me family. But I realized I didn't need to seriously involve myself with such ridiculous people and decided to remain calm on purpose. "So what now? If I leave, you realize that means we're getting a divorce, right? I just want to make sure, because I don't want to hear that I deceived you later. This house is mine, it's in my name since I inherited it. The rights to this house are. Since we're getting a divorce, that means we'll be dividing our assets, right? This house is a substantial inheritance. So, you want to say that just because your granddad owned it, it's all yours? Look, the world doesn't revolve around you. I'm a legitimate ex-husband, so I have rights to half of it. I'll pay you your share, and then you can leave." Interrupting me, my husband spoke utter nonsense. "Emily, you're always so stingy with money, even though you earn a good deal yourself. Don't you think you're expecting too much? You should be nicer to younger girls. You might think of me as a frivolous young girl wasting money, but girls need money. On the other hand, you always dress so plainly, and your makeup is light. What do you even spend your money on? You've completely given up on being a woman. It's pathetic, really." My sister-in-law, having successfully gained my husband's support, proceeded to berate me with him. Seeing their true colors, I lost all affection for them and wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, so I told them I was leaving. "I don't care about the house rights anymore, but are you really sure about this? I just want to confirm that I've made myself clear." The siblings looked momentarily dumbfounded by the swift resolution, but soon they started smirking again. Trying to shake us up, huh? Your behavior is just pitiful. Well, I appreciate that you agreed to the divorce. Here, sign this and be done with it. He threw the pre-filled divorce papers at me. Out of patience and thankful that things were moving quickly, I thought this was actually helpful. Such a sore loser. I'm sorry that he loves me more than he loves you, Emily. Maybe try being a bit more feminine the next time you decide to marry. They laughed together, and I sighed loudly, picking up the divorce papers. Hearing my sigh, my sister-in-law started berating me again, so I turned to my husband and said, "You're really oblivious, aren't you? Your evil sister here is planning to kick you out soon. Instead of laughing, why don't you two have a proper fight?" What? What are you talking about? My husband seemed completely clueless, still tilting his head in confusion. However, my sister-in-law, perhaps due to her youth, couldn't keep a poker face and her expression froze. When my husband called her name, she snapped back to reality and shouted, "What are you talking about? There's no way I'd do something like that." But the agitation in her voice was clear, and it seemed to sway my husband's beliefs. Seeing my chance to turn the tables, I forgot my fatigue and decided to kindly explain everything to them. I just happened to hear it at a bar in front of the college. You were too obsessed with your sister and weren't coming home, and I was tired from dealing with paperwork and didn't have the energy to cook, so I decided to dine out with a friend to refresh myself. I took out my phone and played a recording. Grandma's passed away, so I'll be getting that house soon. Auntie is honestly annoying, but I have my brother on my side. He listens to everything I say. I helped him when he was being bullied by my guy friends, and he's been like this ever since. It's hilarious. Well, they have money, and I'm planning to use them well and get that house. No need to pay rent, and I heard the house is spacious. It's perfect. I want to live there with you, Mike, so after I get the house, I'll suck money from my brother and kick him out. I'm sure it'll be fine. If my brother brings up divorce using the house as a condition, I'm sure Emily will be desperate. Luckily, I was sitting close by, so despite the noisy bar, the audio was clear. At first, she was bad-mouthing not just me but also my husband, so I started recording out of curiosity. But as they drank more and got carried away, she began to talk about her terrible plan, and I unexpectedly caught her in the act. I decided not to tell my husband right away, thinking I would judge his actions first. And disappointingly, he played right into my sister-in-law's hands, presenting me with a divorce. So, I agreed. On my way back from the restroom, I confirmed that the person sitting at the seat was my sister-in-law. My husband was staring at her face with a pale complexion, trembling in his voice. The sister-in-law had been looking down for a while, but suddenly she looked up and, with a flushed face, exclaimed, "This is a fabrication. There's no way you could be so lucky to be in the same restaurant. You don't even know about my boyfriend, and it's creepy to make assumptions just because you saw my face for a moment. And by the way, even if this was really me, eavesdropping so boldly is insane. It's fine to play detective, but don't involve other people." She seemed to still have enough energy to push back, so I played the continuation of the audio recording that I had paused. The sound of boots making a loud noise as they staggered towards the restroom, apparently from someone who was drunk. Immediately after, a man was recorded talking on the phone with someone. The person on the other end seemed to be a woman, speaking in a coddling voice. The man spoke of the sister-in-law as if she were an ATM, stating that he was going to get a house from the ATM's home. He mentioned that whatever he asked for, the sister-in-law would give to him, and since she wasn't working, she would also give him money. It appeared that the brand name items the sister-in-law had received from my husband until now were being passed on to this boyfriend, and in addition to my husband's salary, the money she earned from her part-time job was also being given to this man. Initially, I felt a bit of pity for the sister-in-law who was being played, but now the situation is different. She was secretly devising a sinister plan behind my back, even trying to involve my grandfather's house in it, so I thought she should face the consequences. When the playback ended and I glanced at my sister-in-law, she was already in a daze. She had lost the energy to insist it was a case of mistaken identity, so in my husband's mind, it must have been confirmed that the woman he had been talking to earlier was indeed his sister. I had said all I needed to say, so I was about to leave when I was strongly pulled back by my arm. "Wait! You understand now, right, Emily? I was just being deceived. Let's cancel the divorce and live happily together as we promised." Huh? No need to cancel it. I have the intention to divorce too. Besides, your adorable sister is crying, isn't she? You should take responsibility and take care of her until the end. I turned towards my husband with a refreshing smile as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, grabbed the bare essentials, and swiftly left the scene. Later, I filed the divorce papers, and the divorce was finalized. I would like to say that I am now happily enjoying my single life, but as it turns out, things aren't that simple. My ex-husband was squatting in my grandfather's house, refusing to leave. Not wanting any contact, I had a lawyer mediate, explaining diligently that the inheritance is not subject to property division, but he expressed his anger towards the law, saying then what the heck is property division? How can a husband have no rights, and we were at an impasse. So, I decided to consult my ex-in-laws, whom I had been in regular contact with. They flew in like the wind and gave my ex-husband and sister-in-law a good scolding at my grandfather's house and her apartment, respectively. My father-in-law is apparently quite intimidating when he's angry, enough to make the nefarious siblings shake in their boots, and my mother-in-law later shared the story with a laugh. I think I finally understood why my ex-husband didn't want to visit his parents' house too often after we got married. Regarding the divorce, my in-laws offered an apology. However, I explained that they weren't involved in the matter at all, and I didn't intend to stay in touch with them after the divorce for that reason. I only asked them not to give my new phone number and email address to my ex-husband before hanging up. I think my ex-husband was so persistent about the inheritance probably because he had no savings. When we got married, I suggested opening a new bank account for us to save money together, but he rejected the idea. He had student loans, smartphone bills, other payments related to his hobbies, and on top of that, he gave a considerable amount of money to his sister every month, so he said there was no way he could save any money. So, we settled on saving money separately. I was investing in mutual funds, so I didn't have much cash on hand, and there was no way I could give any money to my ex-husband anyway. Moreover, I have communicated to my ex-husband through a lawyer that I will not demand alimony on the condition that we do not divide our assets. Since I was pressured by my father-in-law's authority to that document, I intend to make sure it is strictly adhered to. It turns out that my ex-husband, who was squatting in my grandfather's house which has now become mine, as well as my sister-in-law, who was squandering her allowance, were both taken back to their parents' house. My ex-husband was made to quit his job, and my sister-in-law was forced to drop out of college. They are apparently working as entry-level employees in a company run by our relatives. They are being completely reformed, both physically and mentally, through grueling Spartan training and seem to be working while crying every day. My mother-in-law sent me a picture of my ex-husband, whose beer belly has completely disappeared and is now in great shape, but I didn't feel a thing. As for my sister-in-law, she initially tried to use her youth and beauty to cozy up to her boss, but she was completely ignored, luckily because the president is a relative. She's had to remove her long, glittering nails, and now she's doing a fantastic job of digging in the dirt and sweating it out. On the other hand, I am enjoying my peaceful days in my grandfather's nature-filled house. I do feel lonely without my grandfather, but when I do, I can flip through the organized albums and go back to those times. It feels like my grandfather is watching over me in this warm house, and I'm thinking it wouldn't be a bad idea to invite some close friends over for a party.